So now, as I often say, it's time for dessert. That means Rick Doblin. So, Rick, welcome.
Hey, Rick.
Hello, Rick. I think you're here.
Yep, I'm here.
Yeah,
Nice. I like to be, well, I like to eat dessert first a lot of times, but it's okay for dessert to be later, to be at the end. I just wanted to comment a little bit before I sort of talk more about MAPS, specifically about the discussion that we just had. And so I just want to say, for Dan and Jim, that it's not that it's less exciting or sexy or anything than what we're doing with therapy. In fact, it's more so, I think. So that I think it's tremendously exciting because, what if we do get it approved as a medicine, but it's not covered by insurance? And so I think that is really the key to equity, to scaling, to everything else. And that's really where it becomes can we practically move it forward into the culture? So I think these discussions about insurance are, absolutely crucial. And that's where I think this concern, just as a strategic point of view, I felt that if we focus on maximizing patient outcomes, then we'll be able to justify the expense because the outcomes will be so good. If we end up trying to say, oh, let's just do a one-session model with MDMA, or for example, a one-session model with psilocybin, which I think in some cases, can be sufficient for some people, but I think that in general, people will benefit from a second session or so. So I worry that if we try to make it as least expensive the intervention, we're also going to make the results less dramatic, and that will also have more of an effect on cost effectiveness and reimbursement. Yeah. So I just think this idea of focusing on maximizing patient outcomes is a really practical way to go in a sense. And what we did see in our first phase 3 study, and I don't know if we'll see this in the second phase 3 study, but the separation in terms of declines in PTSD symptoms between the group that just got therapy and the group that with placebo and group that got therapy with MDMA, the separation increased after each MDMA session. So that the difference between the first and the second session declines were less than the difference between the declines between the second and the third session. So I think in that situation, if we can replicate that in phase 3, it makes a really good argument for a more expensive 3-session model, because you can end up, proportionally getting more benefit from the third session. And what we don't know, and what Rachel Yehuda is going to be looking at the Bronx VA, is the long term. After a year, do people that get 2 sessions or the people that get 3 sessions, are they more or less at the same place because we sort of launched into this self-healing process and people have learned that they don't need to be overwhelmed and that they can process their own trauma on themselves as they go forward? And so will people be more or less the same at the 1-year follow-up, whether they got 2 sessions or 3 sessions? And then the question will be, how much incremental suffering was reduced by having the third session sooner, and can we justify that? So anyway, my main point here is just that the insurance coverage is absolutely critical. And I wanted to comment, I heard recently, just a few days ago, there was a person who is an investment advisor for people wanting to invest in psychedelic stocks. And this is just somebody on the internet, but portrays himself as this very sophisticated investment advisor. And they were reviewing Field Trip. And what they were saying, after I heard about 10 minutes of it, I realized that I could just shut it off and I didn't even need to pay any attention anymore. But what they were saying is that they thought that Field Trip is looking at a shorter acting psilocybin like substance, not actually psilocybin, but similar to psilocybin. It should only take like 2 hours or so. And so what this investment consultant was saying is, oh yeah, this sounds really good. It's going to be more efficient, and this is a good reason to invest in Field Trip. And and so there's just so many assumptions that are not really solid in that kind of thinking, that somehow or other, if you have a 2-hour psilocybin session, that's the same as a 5-hour psilocybin session. in terms of therapy. Maybe you need 3 2-hour sessions to equal the amount that you get from a 5-hour session. Or so it just was this automatic assumption that for insurance companies and for efficiency, what we should do is make this as minimal therapeutic intervention as possible. And that somehow we should be rewarding companies that are trying to develop shorter versions of psilocybin or LSD or MDMA or anything like that. You know, and it gets all the way to the point of 5-MeO-DMT, you know, which is, or smoking DMT, which I think can be helpful for people in depression, particularly if it's associated with therapy before and after. So I think that I'm not going to say that it's a foregone conclusion, you know, that we need an 8-hour MDMA session and that's better than a 4-hour MDMA session, so it's an empirical question. But my just gut feeling is that the longer the time you are in these psychedelic spaces, the more work you get done and the better it is. And we see a lot near the end of the MDMA sessions where people are coming down off the drug and they're having an easier time sort of balancing being in 2 places at once. And they can sometimes deal with things that they couldn't deal with at the beginning of the session, that they've struggled with it for a while, and now finally they can address it. So I think there's an awful lot of therapy that's done in the tail end of a MDMA session or a psilocybin session or an LSD session. So I think that those kind of investment advisors are, you know, worth ignoring. The other thing I just wanted to point out, which is in today's Sunday New York Times in the opinions section, on the cover, maybe if you can see this, it says, "What's magic about magic mushrooms?" And so, you know, this is the New York Times, the cover of all of their opinion articles. They decided that something about psychedelics should be on the cover. But the basic thrust of this entire argument is, who needs the psychedelic part? You know, let's just see what we can do about developing non-psychedelic psychedelics. And we know that DARPA has given, I think it was a $27 million grant to Brian Roth at the University of North Carolina to develop non-psychedelic psychedelics. And so it's a really interesting article. But again, it's this sense that, yeah, if we can cut the therapist out of the process, and if we also can cut the negative side effect of the psychedelic experience, you know, won't this be, you know, beneficial for more people? So, you know, that also seems extremely dubious, because people find meaning and purpose in the content of the experience. It's not just that you've got neuroplasticity from a substance that may open up a critical period. So I think that for people who have strokes or, you know, brain damage of certain kinds, it may be really good to develop non-psychedelic psychedelics that can help promote their brain to route around areas that have been damaged by a stroke or something like that. So you know, and we also know, for example, that bromo LSD, the non-psychedelic version of LSD, is more effective than LSD or psilocybin for cluster headaches. And I mean, LSD and psilocybin are very effective, but the reason that bromo seems to be even more effective is because it's not psychedelic, so that you can give it in milligrams or grams even, whereas, you know, LSD you give in micrograms, and psilocybin you give in you know, milligrams as well, but not micrograms. So that whatever it does, however it's working, we don't really know for cluster headaches, but it does seem like you flood the brain with the non-psychedelic version of LSD, and it can be very effective for cluster headaches. So all of that is just to say, for physical illnesses, for brain damage, for traumatic brain injury, things like that, maybe non-psychedelic psychedelics are the way to go. But I think this idea about, you know, this title is great. What's magic about magic mushrooms? And I think what is magic is the purpose, the meaning, the content. It's not just this neuroplasticity. And I think, you know, what Bill and Brian and others have shown, the correlation between the mystical experience and therapeutic outcomes suggests that really the content of the experience has a big factor to do in the therapy. So, you know, and as to whether we'll be able to really get this covered by insurance, you know, that's going to depend on, I think, a lot about what are the credentials of the therapist? What are they going to be? What is the cost of the therapy? What are the credentials of the therapist? And also, what do we find as far as group therapy? So I think those are things that we're both going to be exploring going forward. But I strongly support this idea of the two therapy team for an individual, but with the second person having lower credentials than the first person, and perhaps being some sort of intern or a student, not even necessarily having a college degree. I think that ideally we should eliminate the requirement that the FDA is putting now on the bachelor's degree, get rid of that, and make it so people can be like an apprentice. I don't even think they need to be in a program to get a license. But again, these are going to be negotiations that we have with the FDA going forward. And the drug is very cheap compared to what they're going to charge for. The cost of the manufacturing of the drug is minimal, de minimis. But the cost of the therapy is substantial. We're thinking it could be $10,000 or something for somebody to go through a course of therapy, 42 hours of therapy, 3 MDMA sessions, 12 90-minute non-drug psychotherapy sessions. So we can give patients the MDMA, but it does them no good if they can't afford the therapy. So the patient assistance programs that we're going to need to develop are going to have to pay people's therapists as well. Mm-hmm. And so that's going to be an enormous financial burden. And at the same time, it's something that helps us justify a higher price for the drug to get more money from the insurance companies. So when we start thinking about where the price of the drug is and who pays for it and how to do that, there's, on the one hand, you want it to be as less expensive as possible in order to get most access to it. But on the other hand, you want to make enough money to fund further research, support your operations, rather than, constantly rely on philanthropy, which will be slower. So I think it's going to be a challenge, and then I think also this sort of fundamental issue about drug policy reform as well as drug development, that really for healing for all, we need to decriminalize and legalize psychedelics the way it's being done in the Oregon Psilocybin Initiative elsewhere, but even further so that people don't have to even have guides if they don't want it to. So that I think we really need that with enormous amounts of honest drug education, pure drugs, harm reduction, treatment on demand, things like that. So I am concerned about, the 1/4 to 1/3 of people in the US that don't even have insurance. And, how do we help them, even if, and there's 12 million people now in the US, according to the Veterans Administration, with PTSD. So, no matter what we have in terms of patient assistance funds, it's not going to be able to treat everybody, or even a small fraction of it. So I think that's a big concern. And then kind of as public education, I just wanted to draw all of your attention, which you probably already know about you may have even spoken about the Netflix documentary about Michael Pollan's book. And I think it's turned out great. It's very, very inspiring. I've been having some discussions with Stan and Brigitte on how it's sort of a shame that Stan was left out of the LSD section. So was Walter Pankey and others. So when they did the history, they didn't quite really do the history. I thought it was beautiful, by the way, with Bill and Brian, about the passing the torch and the relay race and all. I thought that was beautiful. Particularly so since my son is 27 years old. He's working at the world's largest CRO, learning how to do clinical research, but he says that he never wants to work for his father. So I wondered, Brian, if you went through a period like that.
Works with his, it's close. He works with his father.
I like to joke, like, whoever listens to their parents.
Exactly. Yeah.
Somehow we work well together.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I hope that maybe it's a period of my son's age where he's individuating, and then maybe later he'll come around and think about it. But anyway, I thought that part was beautiful. And I think that the whole series is so good. We had a MAPS staff meeting last Thursday, and we talked about it. And one of the concerns we had, somebody raised is, was this Netflix series so positive that, that it's, didn't talk about the risk so much. Is there a danger in that it was so positive? And, but I do think they get across the idea. It doesn't work for everybody, and it's hard work, and it's not just taking the drug. So I think that part got across pretty well. We are having this week as kind of a big update. Last week and this week, we're being inspected by the FDA and Health Canada.
Mm.
And that has been something that, let's see. It's been something that we've expected. When you do the research for phase 3 for drug policy, drug development purposes, that the FDA is going to inspect your data. And so actually, we're kind of grateful that it's happening now. Anyway, I think that that's going to go well. There's been about 20 of MAP staff working with both Health Canada and FDA inspectors who are both inspecting multiple different sites at the same time. And so initially we were told it was going to be about a week and a half. Now we're told that it's probably going to go till the end of Tuesday. But that so far the initial indications are that there's good cooperation. We're providing all the information. They know we're trying hard. There may be some minor findings, and we won't know this for sure till the end of next week or a couple weeks after that, when we actually get the report. But the good part, what it means is that they're really taking us seriously, obviously, because we are in phase 3. And so to have the inspections take place now is going to be really helpful for us to understand what we need to do to finalize all the data gathering and going forward. So overall, it's a really good thing. It's going well. We'll know more in a week or so about it. The part I want to share that's very interesting about the training of therapists, and this is where we've got a very interesting and somewhat frustrating situation. All right, the other part of this training therapists is how do we provide access to MDMA for therapists to have their own MDMA experience. And as we know, for psilocybin, people can go to Jamaica, or they can go to the Netherlands, or there's projects in Costa Rica, or there's different places where therapists can legally get psilocybin, or soon they'll be able to go to Oregon. But there are no such places like that anywhere in the world for MDMA. So how, there's no little loophole, the Netherlands doesn't permit MDMA to be sold at the coffee houses along with, mushrooms and cannabis. So the only way that we can be doing this is really in the context of some kind of government approved protocol or treatment. So as it turns out, through Fluence, actually, the training team, I was told about how there's potential opportunity in St. Vincent's and the Grenadines, these little island nations that were part of the British Commonwealth, and whether they will permit psychedelic clinics as a way to promote medical tourism, but it would still be federally legal in those places. Now I see John is saying you can legally do it in Jamaica. I think, MDMA. Well, we will work on that. So we definitely need to try to figure out how to do that. We need to have, the therapists who deliver the MDMA to other therapists, to have ones that have already worked with PTSD patients, to be really training in the method that they've already learned. So we may, if we can get it together in Jamaica, we may need to, send a bunch of therapists down to Jamaica every now and then to train other therapists. But we're also exploring it in the Bahamas. And so it looks like, so the Bahamas have given permission for an ibogaine clinic for opiate dependence. And so we're working with the people who have authority for that particular ibogaine clinic about working with MDMA. And so there's a meeting with the Prime Minister coming up and some members of the cabinet. There was a meeting last week with the former Prime Minister of Bahamas, and they're all in favor of it. So again, we have these kind of imperatives, I'd say, to really train therapists properly with these increasing concerns about how do we legally provide them MDMA. And so I had a discussion with some of the PBC leadership, and what they were saying is that the approach that our lawyers have suggested, which is to get it in the label, that the label should say MDMA assisted therapy for PTSD delivered by trained therapists whose training can include one MDMA session. If that's in the label, then it's not off label for us to design and create centers where therapists go to get their treatment. It would be without a research context, so it would be just paying for the therapist time. That's going to be affordable. If it's the, so right now we do have a protocol from FDA, MT2 we call it, but it costs $12,000 or more for each therapist to go through. And it's totally not scalable, but that's because all of the data has to be gathered, that there's also going to be audited by FDA. So that creates more costs in terms of getting the data prepared in such a certain way. The safety data is important. So I don't know that the idea of getting this on the label is going to work. We hope that it will, but if it doesn't, then people can prescribe off-label, but we can't knowingly sell to people off-label. So we can't direct this to people that we think are the best capable to train other therapists. So it's not a good solution. And doing it in the context of a protocol is not a good solution either, because it's too expensive. So clinics like in Jamaica or the Bahamas or Canada, if we can get something there going. We just learned recently that the special access program in Canada will not be used, cannot be used for training therapists the way that we had hoped it would. So I'd say this is a key challenge going forward, is how do we properly train the therapists? And then how do we do it in ways that legal and compliance and everything feels comfortable with? So I'm very worried that there's going to be this underemphasis on fully training therapists. So I see, just to say, Joshua's comment, for recent graduates of CIS and Fluence who have completed most parts of the MAPS training, how long can we expect for them to complete the full MAPS training? Well, because it's in excess of $12,000 for us for each person to go through it, we're prioritizing those people that are going to be working on research projects. We need to bring a bunch of people from Europe. We're also working with Eric Vermetten, who's just recently retired in November from the chief psychiatrist for the Dutch Ministry of Defense, where he worked for over 20 years. And he's one of the world's top PTSD researchers. And so he's trying to work with us to get a program in the Netherlands to give MDMA to therapists. And this would be for a bunch of the European therapists for the research, but then also beyond that for post-approval. And they have gotten a very interesting rejection from the IRB, the Ethics, the Science Committee that was looking at it. Not a complete rejection, but what they said was that they thought that the protocol was gathering too much data and that it was too complicated and too time consuming. So that was exactly the news that we wanted to hear. So we will try, because the more complicated it is, the more expensive it is. And so we want to ideally get to the point, and maybe this would be, we will see this in Jamaica or Bahamas or somewhere where basically, I think we're at the point where we don't need to do blood pressure or temperature readings anymore. People's temperature doesn't go up significantly. We've never had anybody overheating. If you do the proper screening, there doesn't need to be any interventions on blood pressure. Look at all the millions of people take MDMA without all these people, reporting heart attacks and things like that. So I think a protocol that would be suitable or useful for training therapists would be qualitative, rather very minimal quantitative stuff, which would be good, but then mostly qualitative. Sort of like what Cody, I think, is doing with the religious leaders study. It would be just to ask them, like the day after, the 2 months after, 1 year after, how useful the experience was to them, personally and professionally, and just have that be the research and have it be very minimal cost. So I don't know that we'll be able to get that simple for the Dutch one, but we're hopefully going to have a Dutch one, and then we will eventually need these kind of access to MDMA everywhere around the world, so that people don't have to travel out of their own country to get it. And, also to help us really scale to the 25,000 therapists we want to train in the US and much more in Europe. We hope that in the next month or so, we don't know for sure, but we've got some good leads. We hope that we'll complete the $70 million fundraising. We've got about 55 million of it so far. So we hope that in the next month or so, we'll have completed that. Then we're trying to figure out what else we need to reach this sustainability point, which looks like it'll be near the end of 2024, where income from the sale of MDMA covers expenses. So we're going to have another big fundraising push after we get this $70 million in, but we're going to see what we can do with philanthropy as opposed to going out for investors. And then as a last point, I'll just say that we are moving forward with two different things. One is these humanitarian projects. We've been in touch with the president of Iraq, who wants MDMA to be brought there for the Yazidi women who've been horribly traumatized by ISIS and others. We are in Armenia. They're going to have to reschedule MDMA before they can even do research. That might not happen till the early part of the year. In Somaliland, we're getting closer to getting a import permit that would be acceptable to the FDA for an initial study that would use to train the therapists. In South Africa, we're moving forward a little bit. So these are very slow moving projects, but I think they're really a big part of the Healing for All. And then in this IIT, this investigator initiated program, where we're also trying to facilitate MDMA research all over the world, and by researchers who will have their own different agendas. We have about 7 active IITs going on that we've helped start. There's around 40 or 50 other applications in various processes of evaluation. But for some, we're now trying to really talk about how to prioritize all these incoming applications. And so the priority that I've suggested is, number one is all the studies related to the Veterans Administration, and that's sort of a key leverage in society. Number two would be studies that are by expert, experienced research teams that are blending MDMA with other forms of therapy, but maybe taking place outside of the VA, like prolonged exposure, cognitive processing therapy, accelerated experiential dynamic psychotherapy, AEDP, that would be the next step. Then the third step would be experienced researchers who want to do anything else than PTSD, on the theory that these experienced researchers don't really need that much from us. And then it would be inexperienced researchers working in one way or another with PTSD, and then it would be inexperienced researchers working on whatever they want to work on. So we're trying to see, right now it seems it's more or less first come or serve, and so we're trying to reorganize, or I'm encouraging the PBC to reorganize that. And in some cases, we're telling, because of our processes, telling people that they're going to have to wait a long time for MDMA. So I'm having our chief counsel for the PBC look at what are MAPS's responsibilities if we just give people permission to cross-reference our IND, and they do everything else themselves. They find MDMA from somebody else, they fund it, they design it, they conduct it. And there was one moment I thought that was really interesting in the Netflix issue on LSD. And it was, well, many moments were interesting, but this was where they said that Sandoz in the 60s, 50s, and 60s were just giving LSD for free to as many researchers as they could, just to help facilitate them to do research with LSD to see what it could be good for. And then the next sentence was, and that led to an incredible flourishing of scientific research all over the world. So I think that we at MAPS should be, and we're having this internal discussion about that we should be doing that same thing as well. And that we should be less concerned about, oh, the risks, what if somebody has a bad outcome? Or what if, we have to spend time reviewing their safety data? Again, I think we're a bit too much on the risk side of things. And that, the golden age of LSD research was facilitated by Sandoz just giving researchers free LSD. And that's in a way how Stan Grof got into it. That's, where his professor in the Czech Republic in the 50s got a bunch of LSD. And so I think we should be doing the same with MDMA. But overall, I think we're in great shape. The Netflix was tremendous. There's going to be a podcast interview with me with Ethan Nadelman coming out next week. So I think it's really a lot we're going to learn from the inspections that are taking place now. And then it's going to be just an enormous amount of regulatory work and then public education and insurance coverage. So overall, I'm super optimistic about the way things are going.
Great. Cool. Thank you, Rick. As always, you're inspiring, exhausting.
There is a lot going on, that's for sure.
It's really fabulous. And maybe just quickly, about Europe, what's happening in Europe right now?
Oh, good. Well, so we've reached a really important point in Europe in our thinking about it, is that we're now working in 7 countries in Europe with the, for European Medicines Agency, including England for the Medicines Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency. And so we're in the final stages of training the therapists by having them work with their first PTSD patient after they've gone through the 100 hours. But we don't have a clear opportunity until we get Eric Vermenten's study up and running in the Netherlands of how to give them MDMA. And so I'm very nervous about them starting in phase 3, where everything really counts, without them having their own MDMA experience. The other part, though, that's been frustrating is sort of the data protection concerns that people have in Europe. GDPR is what it's called. And they've given us trouble about the videotaping of the therapy sessions, which we need for multiple different reasons. They're for the patients in case they want to review what happened, so they don't have to think, oh, I got to remember all this, I got to write this down. They can sort of refresh their memory of what happened. But it's also for us to give feedback to the therapists as part of their training about how they're doing. And then also it's for new therapy trainers to have their own videos that they could use as they develop their own training programs. So we have been put on a clinical hold for a month or two in Europe while we resolve this issue about access to the videotapes. And so that has been resolved. We're going to be coming off clinical hold next week. I'm not sure the exact agreement that we had to make with them, though. So I'll be finding that out. But it seems that these concerns about privacy can go overboard to the point where they even block research, block training, and block access for patients themselves. I think as far as Europe in general, we're not so sure that we can do it ourselves. So we are exploring different partners in Europe to see how that might work. And it's really important. And then just to add, where you all may, I think I've already mentioned this several times, but the European Medicines Agency wants us to work with refugees and migrants as well. And now that we have all these refugees from Ukraine, even more than ever before, it's really important. And there has been a theoretical discussion about, does it help people if they're still in a traumatized situation to help them process the trauma that they've experienced, even if they're going to be getting repeated traumas? Or do you need them to be in a safe place in order to do the therapy? And so ideally, of course, everybody should be in a safe place to do the therapy. But if you are not in a safe place, my sense is that the therapy would still be effective. It's going to open you up. It's going to help you process stuff. I wonder if I could just ask Bill and Brian a question is, do you have a view on this as far as, because it's when you work with people that are, dying of cancer, let's say, it's not that they're out of that stress, so that kind of overall stress is still there, even if you work with them, and you don't want to say, oh, we're only going to work with them when they're cured of their cancer. So I'm curious how you think of this in terms of refugees and migrants with PTSD.
Yeah, the healing always seems to come in and through. It's going through the suffering, sharing the suffering, but then discovering something within the depths of the self that provides new perspectives. And Robin Carhart Harris, maybe new neural connections, I don't know, but enables people to be thankful that they're alive and live more fully.
Yeah, Rick, I would just want to add to that. Yes, I would emphatically encourage moving ahead with MDMA dosing, even in suboptimal conditions. I mean, you can't control for future conditions, but if the person has had a really deep experience, even mystical type, beyond name and form, those future traumas, which may be inescapable, they're encountering them, entering into and moving in and through those traumas with a different frame of reference. And if we could give that gift to people, then whatever the future brings, they can hold it or move through it differently than they would if they had never had that deeper experience.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me.
Mhm.
Um,
I mean, the other group are people of color, the BIPOC community. They may have past traumas, but then they go out in the world and the traumas are going to continue. So
yeah, I think so. So Elizabeth is here. I wonder if she could tell us, Elizabeth Ames, if she could mention anything about where things are at in Ukraine.
Hi there. Sorry, I'm in a low bandwidth environment. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Oh, okay. Kiev, the Russians withdrew from Kiev 3 months ago. And since then, I'd say in the last month, people are psychologically getting back to a more normalized environment, although the population's quite low. UPRA is doing well. We're up to almost 150 members from 8 a year ago. And there's a lot of work beginning in committees about educating about the science. The two thrusts that they're doing is fighting to get their NGO status finalized, which is problematic because all of the efforts of the government are focused on the war. And in terms of strategy, we also face the problem you cited with Armenia, which is we need to have MDMA rescheduled by the government before we can even do any kind of compassionate use type trial like you so generously offered to step in and do with us. So we've made progress with the Ministry of Health and now are moving on to very targeted officials in the Ministry of Interior and with police. And I don't know how those will go, but hopefully positively, because Mrs. Zelenska just was given responsibility for a national overview of mental health, both during and after the conflict. So we're hoping to appropriately surf with that without getting too far out in front of ourselves. And I'm still thinking about moving back there in September or October.
Wow, I didn't realize that MDMA would need to be rescheduled before research could start or treatment.
Yeah, they all do. It's a glitch between, we've reviewed it multiple times because it doesn't make sense. It's part of the country's been independent for 30 years. They still have an underdeveloped legal system, and glitches like this happen.
Wow. Well, if our policy team can help, let us know, because we can provide all sorts of data about rescheduling.
Great, thank you.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you. I love that work's being done in the midst of this meeting, moving us ahead. Great. Well, I think we should honor everyone's commitment to this work, that they've been here on this beautiful Sunday in July. And thank all of you. Thank everyone who presented. It was a wonderful, rich meeting. And we'll look forward to seeing you on September 18th, Sunday. And we're going to hear from the Brain Futures people. We videoed this meeting so that we'll make sure that it's on our website, hopefully within the next week, or certainly within the next 2 weeks. So wonderful to see all of you. Thank you. Thank you. And you're certainly welcome to hang out if you want, but I think most of us want to get outside, or I want to get outside. So thank you, Rick. Great to see you.
Great.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Sherry. Thanks, Rick.
Jerry.
Thanks, Jim and Dan.
Thank you all.
Yeah,
Thank you.
great meeting.
Yeah.
Great meeting.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to close the room. Bye, everyone. Have a good Sunday.
Thanks, Sherry. Love to you. See you.
Bye-bye. Ah, Betsy.